So what does it mean to be content? John the Baptist said here in Luke chapter 3, verse 14, be content with your pay. The Greek word there is ARKEO. Primary meaning of the word is to be enough, sufficient, or adequate. And here it's used in the passive voice. So the idea is let it be sufficient, let it be adequate, let it be enough. Another place where this word shows up is in 1 Timothy chapter 6. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. We will say, that's enough, that's sufficient, that is adequate. Because if we don't say that's enough, then nothing ever will be enough, will it? No matter how hard we try, no matter how many different things we chase, nothing will ever be enough. And so the verse goes on. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. They have wandered from the faith. In other words, they have looked at God's promises and they have said, that's not enough for me, so I'm going to look elsewhere. Or they have looked at the riches that they have in Christ Jesus and they have said, that's not enough for me, I'm going to look elsewhere. And in doing so, they have pierced themselves with many griefs. Their life didn't get better, it got worse. They didn't find happiness, they found more grief. Do you know people who live like that? Have you been living like that? Chasing after the next thing that you think is going to satisfy, recognizing that we have the bare necessities and even more, but we are rarely satisfied. Well, let's look then at another place where that word is used. ARKEO shows up again in Hebrews chapter 13. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content. There it is again. Call it enough. Call it adequate, sufficient for you. Be content with what you have. Because God has said, and this is the reason why we can be content, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You know, God tells us to love Him and to love others. That's the summary of the Ten Commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He never tells us to love things or possessions. In fact, He tells us not to love those things. Be content. Be content with what you have. And again, we see this inverse relationship between coveting and contentment. If you love money, you will never have enough. And if you don't love money, then you already have enough. And indeed, you do have enough because you have the promises of God. That's why you can be content when that one more thing that you think you need to be happy never comes, because God has said, never will I leave you. And that's why you can be content in the lean years as well as the fat years, because God has said, never will I forsake you.